Hey class, this is the lecture about Manifest Destiny or Westward expansion beyond the Mississippi River during the antebellum era. So it's our second big topic for Unit 4. We just got done with the Jackson era, and now we're going to start talking about Manifest Destiny and Westward expansion. So what is Manifest Destiny? According to John L. O'Sullivan, who coined the phrase, he says, other countries have tried to hamper our power, limiting our greatness and checking the fulfillment of our manifest destiny to overspread the continent allotted by Providence for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions. Basically saying other countries have tried to stop the United States from spreading out over the continent, but it's the destiny of the U.S. provided by God or Providence for the United States. Basically, it's the destiny of the U.S. to dominate North America and the continent. And this quote kind of symbolizes the feeling that Americans had when it came to expansion and westward expansion to Oregon and California and Texas, some of the topics that we're going to talk about in this PowerPoint. So first we need to go on with a little bit of foreign policy, thinking about the Oregon Territory here in the Northwest. You notice this map of Oregon shows us what Americans considered Oregon Territory as early as 1818. So at this time, the United States kind of went to the Rocky Mountains. We bought this up to the Rocky Mountains in the Louisiana Purchase. And Oregon Territory was kind of jointly occupied, and put that in air quotes, by the British and the United States in 1818. Our claim to this territory comes from the Lewis and Clark expedition, which got here to about Eugene, Oregon, somewhere around there. And the British, their claim was, well, this is part of Canada. So there weren't really that many people there to kind of argue over the territory in 1818. So the U.S. and Great Britain just said, well, we'll jointly occupy it. We'll kind of share the territory. So both British and American people can settle here if they want. Spain and Russia also had claims to this territory. Russia actually owned Alaska. That was part of the Russian Empire. And Spain had claims going back to the the conquistadors that this was part of their area. San Francisco was a Spanish city, so they claimed this was also part of New Spain. But the 1819 Adams-Onis Treaty between the U.S. and Spain convinced Spain to give up their claim to Oregon and Florida. Then in 1825, Russia gave up its claim to Oregon. It was dealing with a series of wars and other issues, and they kind of ended their ideas of expanding into North America. So from that point on, Oregon Territory was just jointly occupied between the British and the United States. And for people that actually did settle there, most Americans tended to settle more in the southern part and British people more in the north. Also, in talking about U.S. foreign policy at this time, we have to go back to something that we mentioned in Chapter 10 but didn't really dive into, and that's the Monroe Doctrine. So the Monroe Doctrine was a foreign policy statement that the United States issued in 1823 regarding Mexican independence. So if you recall, during the Napoleonic Wars, Napoleon conquered Spain, and therefore got all of the Spanish colonies, including Louisiana. He sold Louisiana to the United States and kept Mexico as a French/Spanish colony. When Napoleon was defeated, these colonies kind of went back under control of Spain, but Spain was weakened to the point where it really couldn't keep its colonial hold on Mexico. So in 1821, Mexico declared independence from Spain, fought a war for independence, and actually won. Around 1823, some European powers started talking about trying to recolonize Mexico. They saw it as like a weak country ripe for the taking, and this could be an opportunity to kind of take it over. And so countries like Austria, Russia, and of course Spain were thinking about creating this kind of triple alliance to go in and conquer Mexico and cut it up into three parts and keep them as colonies. This is concerning to the United States because, again, we had just expanded into Louisiana. We had a treaty of joint occupation up here in Oregon. So we were kind of concerned about European countries coming back in and occupying this area again, and kind of wonder, is the United States next? So the United States under President Monroe and Secretary of State John Quincy Adams wrote this foreign policy statement, which they basically said that North America is off limits to European colonization from this point forward, and that the United States is going to be the dominant force in the Western Hemisphere. If any European country tries to recolonize any free country in Latin America and South America, the United States would intervene and fight on behalf of Latin America. So this makes America sort of the superpower in the Western Hemisphere. It reduced our reliance on European relationships and allowed the United States to really focus on our sort of dominance, if you will, of Central and South America. So after the Panic of 1837, which we just discussed in great detail, a lot of people lost their jobs and kind of questioned factory work. You know, is factory work really reliable? Is it safe? Or really, maybe should I be a farmer? And so a lot of out-of-work people who lost factory jobs in 1837, the Panic of 1837, started to think about going back into agriculture and farming, and they looked to the far west for land. Much of the land in Oregon and Washington and that part of the country was unsettled. It was just Native Americans, and it was basically free. The federal government said if you can get there, it's yours. So thousands of Americans kind of sold all their possessions and gathered up their family or went out on their own on this trail called the Oregon Trail, or this path to Oregon, to try to get there and kind of restart their lives. Those people that actually made it there ended up being pretty prosperous for the most part. Of course, there were some disasters, if you will, along the way. But most people that got there were able to pretty much survive and make a new start of it. Oregon was really popular for missionaries. There was this sort of religious revival kind of going on in America at the same time. And a lot of missionaries saw the Pacific Northwest as a new place where they could go and sort of convert new people to Christianity. And a great example of this is the Whitman Mission in Astoria, Oregon. They were originally Christian missionaries there. This, however, did cause some conflict between Native Americans and the missionaries. For example, the Whitman Mission brought smallpox with them and ended up killing off hundreds of Native Americans. So Native Americans started to begin to associate white people with disease, and some people that went along the Oregon Trail were attacked by Native Americans because of this association. And it would take years for that sort of stigma to be overcome. So we go on to Texas. So this idea of expansion, right? So we just talked about Oregon and Americans expanding in Oregon, and that was a place that the United States had a claim to, and kind of was allowed to colonize or settle, if you will. But we move on to Texas, and expansion into Texas became a big deal in the 1830s for a variety of reasons. So we talk about Texas, we're talking about this sort of section of the state and of North America. And in Texas at the time, it was a very sparsely populated part of Mexico. And remember, Texas was originally part of Mexico. In 1821, there were only about 3,000 native Tejanos, or Mexican Texans, living in that area. So Mexico wanted to kind of create some policies to grow the population of this area and hopefully prevent it from being colonized by a European nation. So the Mexican government granted Moses Austin land to start a cotton growing colony in Texas, and his son Stephen F. Austin grew a lot of cotton, created some really big plantations, and of course brought slaves with them. By 1830, about 7,000 Americans were living in Texas, and they did a lot of trade with the United States. So a lot of the cotton that was grown here was sent over into Louisiana and shipped out of New Orleans. And so a lot of these Americans kind of saw Texas as an expansion of America. In 1830, however, the Mexican government thought that the Americans that were coming to Texas were changing the culture of Texas. So they issued this decree of 1830 that said anyone who wasn't Catholic, didn't speak Spanish, and owned slaves no longer had a right to their land. Well, you have to figure most Americans that went there didn't speak Spanish, they spoke English. Everyone brought slaves because they were growing cotton. and most Southern Americans were not Catholic. They were Protestant. So pretty much everyone that owned land in Texas didn't meet this criteria. In addition, Mexico banned immigration from the United States to Mexico. And this angered a lot of Americans, particularly the ones that were already there, because, you know, they were doing a lot of trade with America, and, you know, they wanted family members and friends and just Americans in general to be able to move to Texas. The kind of dictator of Mexico at the time, General Santa Anna, decided to use the army to assert control over Mexico. Basically, he sent the military there to try to enforce this Mexican decree of 1830. While Americans in Texas saw this as a threat, basically they felt their rights were being violated, and so they revolted and they declared independence from Mexico and started Texas's War for Independence. So Americans in Texas fought a couple-year-long battle against the Mexicans. Couple of the famous battles in this conflict. One many of you probably know is the Alamo, where this is where Americans were hauled up in the Spanish mission, and the Mexican army surrounded them. And Americans here, or the rebels here, actually sent a telegram to the United States for help and assistance to fight Mexico. But the United States did not respond. The United States said that the Texans were actually on their own, and we'll get into why in a moment. The Battle of San Jacinto, the Texan rebels finally defeated the Mexican army. This was the final battle of the conflict, and after that, Texas was granted independence, and Texas became an independent country, or the Republic of Texas. They organized their own government. They elected a president whose name was Sam Houston, but there was a border dispute that continued after the War for Independence with Mexico. The Texans claimed that their border really was the Rio Grande River, our current border with Mexico today. But the Mexican government claimed it was really the Nueces River, and that the Republic of Texas really kind of stopped here. So there was some disputed territory here between Texas and Mexico. But the bottom line is that Texas, this area right here, there we go, this part of Texas, was the independent Republic of Texas, or as they called themselves, the Lone Star Republic. Okay, so let's just stop and check here for a moment, something we just went over. Why did Mexico allow Moses Austin to create a colony in Texas? Think about that stop and check question. Write down an answer on your PowerPoint if you have it in front of you, and you can pick up the lecture again here in part 2 on YouTube.